Hi, this lesson today is week one. Um, we are starting Greek myths. What do they have in common with fables? Well, if you remember from August, going back in time here a little bit, Aesop was the collector of fables, and he was from Greece. So a lot of origin stories like fables and our month for Greek myths, these stories originated through oral tradition. They were thousands of years old. So the story I picked today was really specific. I tried to go outside of the box a little bit and not the normal stories that you are familiar with. So I'm going to share my screen here so we can see just page one of the overview. Greek myths are over 2,000 years old. Many stories from Greek mythology have phrases derived from them. And if you've already done week two, if you're doing these out of order, we talked about cutting the Gordian knot. The word phrase Achilles heel is used to describe someone's weakness. When someone's in danger, they open Pandora's box. If someone, everything they do is successful, they're said to have the Midas touch. If it's a challenging undertaking, it's explained as a Herculean task. So just like fables had a maxim, a clear message, Greek myths have a moral lesson. They're designed to warn Greek citizens of the dangers of hubris. Hubris, really interesting. If you look up the definition, hubris is arrogance and pride. Well, number one of the 7 deadly sins. We all can feel like we're more important than others or superior. And then hubris adds that arrogance, right? And we push the limits, maybe the boundaries. We go outside of the rules. So we're arrogant. We cross the limits. We don't follow the rules. And you know what happens in Greek mythology when you do that? You anger the gods. And when you anger the gods, you are punished. Those of you who had me last year, we did Arachne and Athena. And Arachne was prideful. She was a wonderful weaver, but she was arrogant. And she basically challenged Athena, saying, I'm better than you. You don't do that to a god, right? She crossed the line. So Athena turns her into a spider so she can weave webs. Again, you don't mess with the gods. So the fascinating thing about Greek myths and fables, they really poke fun of human weakness, human flaws. And here we are in 2023 reading Greek myths, and humans haven't changed that much, which makes them timeless and universal. So let me start with a summary of Icarus and Daedalus. Icarus was the son of Daedalus, who was a gifted architect and inventor of the labyrinth, built to trap a dangerous minotaur for King Minos. Daedalus knew he crafted such an extraordinary elaborate maze, it was highly unlikely anyone could escape. After Daedalus and Icarus were imprisoned in the maze, Daedalus knew he'd have to come up with an ingenious idea to escape the labyrinth. Daedalus thought, right here, of a new creation to escape, so asked his son Icarus to collect wood, seabird feathers, beeswax, and glue, and design 2 pairs of wings for each of them to use to fly out and away from the island of Crete. Before they took off, Daedalus gave his son 2 warnings. So in the stories, there's different versions of Icarus and Daedalus, like Cinderella when we did fairy tales last month. So different variations. First, he warned Icarus not to fly too close to the sun or else the wax would melt. Second, he was told not to fly too close to the sea so that the moisture would not dampen the wings, making them too heavy. None of the stories I've chosen today or the video really include the second warning, but it is interesting that he was given advice from his father. Icarus, though, is dazzled by the flight and overcome by the freedom he felt while flying and flew too close to the sun. He disobeyed. So unfortunately, spoiler alert, this is not a good ending, everybody. This is tragic. He was having so much fun and flew so high He was unable to hear the cries from his father, warning him to turn back. Eventually, as he drew closer to the sun, he noticed the wax beginnings to melt his wings, but it was too late. The feathers started to drop, causing Icarus to fall to his death in the sea. Icarus landed in a part of the Mediterranean Sea, which is said to be named after him, the Icarian Sea. Okay, so let me play the video for you all. Here we go. A version.
Daedalus was a major architect and inventor, renowned throughout Greece, but that did not thwart his and his son Icarus's imprisonment in the labyrinth of King Minos in Crete. Facing the accusations of conspiring against the king and helped the hero Theseus defeat the Minotaur, Daedalus was accountable for the construction of the labyrinth, and therefore he knew that an escape was unlikely. And even if he managed to escape the labyrinth, Crete was patrolled by land and sea by the army of Minos. After several days in prison, the ingenious inventor had an exquisite idea. He asked his son to collect pieces of wood while he drew the draft of his new project. Daedalus then edifies wooden frames that resemble bird wings. After gathering a good amount of seabird feathers which flew over the labyrinth, he was able to finish his invention using beeswax as glue. He had built 2 pairs of enormous wings, one for him and the other for his son. Daedalus wears his wings and notices that his invention works perfectly. Icarus is helped by his father to embody his wings and get some advice from his father.
Son, do not fly too low near the sea, in order to avoid having the dampness stiffening the frail's gearings, nor fly too high so that the sun does not melt the beeswax. Stay close to me at all times.
Then Daedalus and
2
Icarus
warnings in
take
the
off
video.
and leave Crete behind. They both struggle a bit in the beginning, having to face the wind currents, but they quickly master the whole flight. The view from the sky was mesmerizing. They were both in ecstasy. When Daedalus realizes Icarus was flying away from him and at a much higher altitude than his, concerned, he yells at his son, but the young boy could not hear him. Icarus was dazzled with the flight and was flying with his eye closed, piercing the clouds. He was absolutely intoxicated with the sensation of freedom. The youngster was getting closer and closer to the sun, and suddenly he perceives that the sun's heat was starting to melt the beeswax, which glued the feathers and the structure of the wings together. The feathers started to fall, and so Icarus began to lose control of the flight. The wings started to crumble. The fall of Icarus was now unavoidable. He falls from heaven while his powerless father witnesses the fatal fall of his son. Icarus violently hits the ocean waters. Daedalus flies to rescue his son, but he only finds feathers in the sea. After a long search, Icarus's father finally finds the body of his son laying on a beach. Daedalus regrets that his invention has been the cause of Icarus's death.
Okay, but was his invention the cause of Icarus's death? Of course not. The cause of Icarus's death was his own foolishness. So a little bit of analysis of the story, and then I'll read you this story. This is actually one of the most famous Greek myths. It's interpreted as being fundamentally about the dangers of pride and not thinking the rules apply to you. And unfortunately, this was obviously a tragic outcome. So Icarus's disastrous flight is a metaphor for man's overreaching of his limits. Icarus, though, he was young. He was immature and foolish, perhaps believing the rules didn't apply to him. He thought he could fly closer to the sun without consequences, or perhaps he just got caught up in the moment, which would be a sign of his maturity as well. The story can be interpreted as being a warning about acting recklessly. And I think Icarus, like many young men and young women, when you're a teenager up through your 20s, you have a underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, which means you are a little bit reckless and overconfident and lack self-control until this develops, and it doesn't develop until about age 25. I don't think he was a bad kid. I just think he got caught up in the moment. And I think teenagers today are just like Icarus. Think of all the things that teenagers do. The first thing that comes to my mind is teenage drivers. They are the highest to insure because they are so reckless. They'll text and drive. They'll drive with the radio really loud. They'll drive with a lot of people in the car and they won't pay attention to the road. Maybe watch something while they're driving, which is crazy. But they think that they can get away with it without consequences. And unfortunately, teenage drivers have more accidents and fatalities than any other age group. So that should tell you, kind of, the mindset of a young person, a young man or young woman. Icarus was human and young, and he overestimated his ability to take unnecessary risks. And to be fair, I know adults that take unnecessary risks. Think about the people that climb Mount Everest, or the people that, do rock climbing of walls without, free solo, like Alex Honnold, that jump out of airplanes. There's an inherent risk anytime you do something dangerous. Most people his age will make numerous mistakes as well, but in their case, they're probably going to be able to learn from those mistakes. When you make a mistake, you become more humble. You exercise more caution in the future, which is why this story of Icarus, the shock of it, oh my gosh, he died, is important. If he had a good ending, no one would learn a lesson from it. Okay, so I'm going to give you the original version that I chose. And here we go, Icarus and Daedalus. On the island of Crete, there lived a minotaur, a ferocious creature that was half man and half bull. The people of the island of Crete were terrified of the minotaur. It loved nothing more than to feast on human flesh. They begged their ruler, King Minos, to order that the creature be killed, but the king decided against this. Instead, he constructed a plan to imprison the minotaur. To die at the hands of the minotaur would be one of the most terrible deaths imaginable, and King Minos believed that his enemies deserved to meet such a fate. He enlisted the help of Daedalus, a talented architect, inventor, and craftsman, and asked him to build a labyrinth, a maze of passages that would be so complex it would be virtually impossible for anyone or anything to ever find a way out. Daedalus did as King Minos requested, and then following the king's instructions, he enticed the minotaur into the labyrinth by leaving a huge pile of fresh meat in its center. Once the minotaur was in the labyrinth, the creature was unable to escape. King Minos was delighted. Anyone who was sent to the labyrinth would be trapped, and eventually they would be found by the minotaur, who would eat them alive. Now he had the perfect punishment for his enemies. Deciding he had no further use of Daedalus, the king threw him into the labyrinth along with his son Icarus. The king expected that the inventor and his son would be found by the minotaur and eaten. Instead, unknown to the king, they escaped. After all, Daedalus had built the labyrinth and knew his way around. Once out of the labyrinth, Daedalus and Icarus carefully made their way to the shore of the island and pondered on what to do next. The trees and bushes surrounding the beach would provide an ideal sanctuary for the time being. They could possibly survive for months or years without being seen, but who would want to live like that, hiding away, hoping they would not be captured? They needed to find a way to leave the island, but how? They could not swim. The nearest land was too far away, and they would never make it. They could not leave by ship. All vessels were controlled by King Minos. Daedalus stared up at the sky and the seagulls that circled overhead. If only he was as free as a bird. If only he and his son could just fly away. And then he had an idea, which was both brilliant and ambitious. He would build a pair of wings. It would take some time, days, weeks even, but he would build a pair of wings for his son and himself, exactly the same as the wings of a seagull, but on a much larger scale. Scattered around the beach were seagull feathers. Daedalus instructed his son to collect as many as he could find. He worked carefully to build the wings, studying the exact angle and shape of the seagulls and examining how the birds flew. At last, 6 weeks after they had escaped from the labyrinth, the wings were ready. With these wings, you will fly like a bird, Daedalus told his son, but be careful. Make sure you do not fly too close to the sun. If you do, the wax that holds the feathers together will melt. Icarus nodded quickly. This is a sign right here of his immaturity, this little passage. In truth, he was barely listening. Hiding on the shore of the island of Crete had been boring. He'd spent weeks doing nothing more exciting with his days than collecting feathers and catching fish for his father and himself to eat. And now, at last, they had the chance to escape. He shuffled impatiently as his father attached the wings to his arms, then helped his father to position his own wings. This is foreshadowing. The impatience he's showing is kind of a sign it's not going to go well. We are ready, his father told him. Follow me. Daedalus ran towards the ocean, sweeping his arms up and down as he did so. With a whoosh, he zoomed forward, rising into the air. Icarus copied his father. Suddenly, he found his feet were no longer on the ground. He was in the air. He was flying. He couldn't believe it. As he looked down at the sea, Daedalus and Icarus below, his heart fluttered with excitement. It was as though his body was weightless. The wind whistled against his ears. He felt like a bird. Higher and higher, faster and faster, he flew. Suddenly, Icarus realized he could hardly see his father. He'd flown so high, his father resembled a small dot below him. At the same time, he noticed a feather drift past and float downwards towards the sea. And then another, and then another. Too late, Icarus realized his wings were melting. He had flown too close to the sun. With every desperate swoop of his arms, more feathers fell, and soon his arms were almost bare. Down and down went Icarus. "Father!" he shouted before falling with a heavy splash into the sea. His few remaining feathers floated on the surface of the water as he sank. Daedalus could only watch helplessly, and his heart felt as heavy as stone as he flew onwards, leaving his son behind. Okay, so you'll notice the next page. I'm going to break down the story elements, and this is really important for your assignment, everybody, because today I'm going to have you write a story about someone who maybe didn't listen to an elder person's advice, maybe a teacher, a parent, a coach, and they didn't follow the rules and the consequence they suffered because of it. So we've got who here? We've got King Minos, Daedalus, and Icarus. What's the problem? Your story must have a problem. Daedalus and Icarus are trapped in the labyrinth. Just saw that typo there. The beginning, on the island of Crete, there lived a ferocious minotaur who was half man and half bull. King Minos enjoyed how his people feared the minotaur, so instead of having him killed, found a way to imprison him. Rising action. King Minos requested Daedalus to construct an elaborate labyrinth, that's a tongue twister, to trap the minotaur, which he was able to do. The climax of the story is when King Minos has no more use for Daedalus after he built the labyrinth, and he traps him and his son Icarus in the maze, expecting them to be eaten by the minotaur. The falling action is here in this story is different from the video. Daedalus finds a way to escape. So it kind of makes sense that he and Icarus could escape the labyrinth when he designed the labyrinth. A lot of stories will show them escaping the labyrinth on the wings, right? But how would he get all of the seagull feathers in the labyrinth if he hadn't? Does that make sense? If he hadn't escaped the labyrinth. Anyway, so he finds a way to escape by building seagull wings for himself and his son. He warns Icarus not to fly too close to the sun, or the wax he used would cause the feathers to fall off. Notice in the story, there's only one warning. Resolution: Icarus is caught up with the excitement of flying. He does not heed the advice of his father, Daedalus, important, and flies too close to the sun, causing him to fall to his death. Where? The island of Crete in Greece. When? Thousands of years ago. Why? Greek myths were intended to teach Greek citizens a moral lesson about their flawed behavior. Daedalus thought he found a solution to his problem by creating wings to fly and escape. However, his son Icarus failed to be obedient and refused to heed his warning. So Icarus was young, immature, and reckless, believing he could break the rules and still enjoy what he wanted. Does that sound like kids today? It kind of sounds like some adults today too, to be fair. So this story shows what happens when someone refuses to stay within the bounds of what are accepted rules. So make sure, and I've kind of put the story elements here, you map out the story. Who's going to be in your story? What's the problem going to be? Once you've established it, figure out what's the beginning, what's the rising action, what's going to be the turning point in your story, the falling action, the resolution, where and when is this going to take place? What message do you want here? And the message is kind of already picked for you, that that when you break rules, there are logical consequences. So obviously the definition of a rule is an accepted principle or instruction that states the way things are done or should be done, allowed or disallowed. So it is, at school, it's a code of conduct, it's etiquette, it's a guide. You are supposed to be obedient, disciplined. So think about the rules that kids break at school. And these are just a few. Eating snacks during the day, goofing off when you're supposed to be working on assignments, misusing technology during school hours, talking out of turn, disrespecting teachers, disrespecting peers, stealing from others, bullying others, lying about schoolwork. Here's a big one. Cheating. I remember putting that on my board. Okay. I'm sure you can think of some really good topics. Here's what I don't want. I don't want an academic topic. I don't care. Teachers do not care about academic topics. I know it's important to you. I know grades are important to you. I get it, right? But your story has to be about, what's going to make you cross the line. Cheating because you didn't study is a better topic. Does that make sense, everybody? I don't mind if you do it, but have a story around it, okay? Rules broken at home. I know y'all do this. You stay up too late, don't you? Watching too much television, spending too much time on technology, maybe playing too many games, misusing technology, refusing to help with chores, not cleaning up after yourself. Maybe you disrespect mom and dad. Talk back to them. I sure hope not. Deliberately disobey behind their back. Unfortunately, kids are guilty of that. Why? They behave like Icarus. They get caught up in the moment. So when we talk about examples of what would this be like, imagine if you went to school next week, and imagine just for a moment, no one followed the rules. I'm pretty sure that would be a pretty unsafe environment. Think about driving in your car. No one followed the traffic laws. Okay, so rules are intentional, and parents and teachers and whoever advises you to follow the rules, they have your best interests at heart. But sometimes you maybe think you have all the answers, and maybe, like Icarus, you push the envelope. So I know it's a tragic story today, but I want to tell you that there are tragic things that happen to kids. You go on your bike and you're not paying attention, and a car can hit a child. You go on your scooter too fast, you can run into something. God forbid, I don't know if you know this, the number one cause of death in 2023 for children is not pediatric cancer. It's guns. And it's tragic how many kids come across their parents' gun, and they know not to touch it. They know it's not fair game, but I do think it's a kind of an Icarus mentality. I got this. I can handle it. I'm just going to look at it. And then something accidental happens. So I don't think Icarus was like intentionally trying to hurt himself. No, I think he got caught up in the moment, but I think any kid can get caught up in the moment. Okay, so let's look at our cause and effect basic essay outline. A lead idea here. Greek myths were similar to Aesop's fables in that they originated from a similar time period and were rooted in Greek culture. Just as fables intentionally explained a maxim, the same was true for Greek myths, as they also imparted a moral lesson. These lessons served as warnings to Greek citizens about how their often reckless and immoral behavior could land them into trouble. Sound familiar, everybody? Ironically, these same moral messages apply to humans today. They're still making the same mistakes as those who lived thousands of years ago, and they often come at a high price. So here's our thesis. In the Greek myth, Icarus and Daedalus, the moral lesson to be learned from Icarus, who failed to heed the 2 warnings stated by his father, Daedalus, still applies to children and teens today who often face serious consequences when they break rules at home or school. Let me just say, too, if you're not a teenager, you don't need to be writing a topic about a teenager. If you're not an adult, you have no business writing a topic about an adult. Ladies and gentlemen, please write about appropriate topics that are age appropriate to your level, okay? Avoid an academic topic. Come on, you can do better, right? There are so many things that go on at school, right? That are more interesting than that. Okay, so body paragraph 1. This is at home. And I know you're not perfect at home because I was the youngest of 4, and I know I wasn't perfect at home. So if a child defies their parents and goes against their wishes, they often end up regretting their choice because they will be punished. So I want you to notice all of the sentences show cause and effect. When this happens, this happens. Your story must show cause and effect. This is the problem. This is what happened. This is what happened as a result. This is the punishment or consequence that happened as a result. So here's your assignment. You're going to write one story, right? Make up a fictitious name. Don't use a real name. Tell me who, what, where, when, why, how, and explain a situation where a child might break a rule, and maybe tell me who told them that that was the rule, mom or dad, grandma, grandpa, and what they would like, what punishment they would likely be given. Now, make sure the topic or incident is relatable and interesting. Again, please don't pick an academic topic at home, for goodness sake, but avoid that altogether, all right? Body 2, at school, when students disobey the code of conduct, they often endure serious consequences. Again, you're going to write a story, one story, right? Who, what, where, when, why, how. If a child breaks a rule at school, what punishment would they likely be given? Think about your topic here. What would be more interesting here? He didn't make a good grade on his assignment, or there was a fight in the hallway. I mean, come on, right? Or somebody stole something. I mean, think about it. Make sure it's a fun topic that you want to write about and others want to read about. If a student decides to flout the rules, this not only negatively impacts them, but those around them, which is why they often feel remorse about their actions. So children and teens today often act out with the same foolish defiance as Icarus, who failed to heed the warnings of his father Daedalus, as shown in the Greek myth Icarus and Daedalus, which showed breaking the rules, cause and effect, can come at a high price. So the story of Icarus ended tragically as it resulted in his death. Even though this seems extreme and most children will never have to endure such horrifying consequences, it can happen. For example, there are more firearm fatalities among children in the United States compared to other nations. In fact, guns kill more children and teens today as compared to pediatric cancer. Just like Icarus never intended to hurt himself, but was caught up in the excitement of the moment, the same result can happen to children and teens today when they do not listen to the advice of adults around them or defy the rules. This is why rules were put in place, as they serve as a means of protection. Okay, so as you can see here, I've given 2 example body paragraphs. Topic choice is key. Now, the first example I'm going to give you is about a 16-year-old Emma who finally passed her driver's test a few days after her birthday. She was so excited because her parents had promised her that she could drive their older BMW. Lost my place. Her parents were hesitant to give her the keys to their old car because she just didn't seem to take the rules of the road seriously. This was because when they drove in the car with Emma, she turned up the radio, playing her music loudly, and kept her cell phone right next to her. There's the problem, the cell phone in the car. Okay, in case you missed it. Emma kept telling her parents she knew what she was doing. She planned to be safe and they could trust her. Finally, her parents agreed to give her the keys, but only on one condition. Emma had to promise she would put her cell phone in the trunk so she would not be tempted to look at it while she was driving. As soon as her friends joined Emma in the car, one of them retrieved her phone and gave it to her. Giggling and talking about a funny TikTok video, one of her friends told her to look at her phone, which Emma did while running a red light. A few minutes later, the sounds of crushing metal and squealing tires were heard, followed by Emma's cry, "I'm in deep trouble." Glad she was safe, Emma's parents knew she had to be taught a lesson. Of course, the car was taken away, but Emma had to pay for the repairs herself, which meant she was forced to get a job. Okay, so I want you to notice something. And you don't know this, but this happened to my daughter when she was 17. I kind of took an example of a situation I knew about. Okay, if you're not 16, you don't need to be writing about this. I am an adult and I have an adult perspective. So I wrote about a topic that I knew, and I knew it actually could happen because it happened to my daughter. So make sure you're writing about what you know, everybody. The last one, at school, when students disobey the code of conduct, they often endure serious consequences. Adam played football for his middle school team, and he was the star quarterback. According to UIL guidelines, that's University Interscholastic League, any student athlete must maintain passing grades to remain eligible to play any sport during a semester. Adam was a top student until he started hanging around the popular group. Trying to impress them, Adam agreed to hang out with them after school practice for a few hours. He always told his parents football practice ran late as he lived close by the school and would walk home by himself. Plus, both of his parents worked and could count on him in the past to do the right thing. Nothing happened at first, but over time, Adam had less time to study, so his grades slipped. He was not too concerned until he failed a midterm algebra exam, and his football coach called him into the office to tell him he was on academic probation. Thinking he could talk his way out of it, he told his coach not to worry, that he could easily raise his grade point average to passing. However, his coach told him he was bound by UIL rules and forced to bench him from all practices and games for 3 weeks. When his teammates found out, they were furious because they had no one as good as him to replace him as quarterback, which meant they would lose games. Okay, so I know you're thinking she chose an academic example. That's not the problem here. The problem here was he thought he didn't have to put in the effort, and his grade slipped. And then he thought he could talk his way out of it. And by the way, this really happens. If you're in a public or private school, academics must come first. According to UIL guidelines, you cannot participate in sports or clubs or any other school activity if you are not passing. So I know that you're probably thinking, well, she said, don't do a topic about grades. This really wasn't about grades. What he defied was, doing his job, basically. And doing what he was supposed to do, coming home straight after school. Yes, his grades were reflected in it, but there was much more, a bigger story here. So if you want to do that, I'm okay with that. I just don't want, he didn't study for a test and he failed. Nobody cares about that kind of topic. Come on, there's a lot better topics you can choose, okay? And I'm just being honest with you all, students, you're going to have teachers that will tell you the same thing. Pick a really good topic. Make it so you have fun writing it and I have fun reading it. Okay. All right. This concludes lesson 1 for October. This is our first Greek myth on Icarus and Daedalus. Have a great time. Hope you enjoy the lesson.